Welcome to the Causes or Cures podcast, your gateway to understanding health and groundbreaking medical research in a fun and easy to understand way. With Dr. Eeks as your host, join us as we sit down with the world's leading doctors and scientists to unravel the mysteries of health. From practical tips on well-being to the latest breakthroughs in medical research, we cover it all. Don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's ignite our curiosity and together dive into today's episode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Causes or Cures. I'm Dr. Eeks, your host, and I hope everybody is doing grand out there. So let's talk about being single. And this is actually the first of two podcasts that I'm going to do on this topic. Society loves a good stereotype, right? Especially about single women. You know the one. Sad, lonely, crying into a glass of wine, surrounded by cats, knitting sweaters for cats she doesn't have, really boring life, but always cats. And first of all, what is wrong with cats? I love cats. They're beautiful, mysterious creatures. I mean, let's face it, a lot of them are better than a lot of humans out there. And, also, what about married people who have cats? You know them, I know them. What is that? Married with cats. And then there's, living in sin with cats. You gotta love all these scenarios with cats and all the judgments that come with them. But anyways, plot twist. The research says it's not the cat ladies. It's not the single ladies who are sad and miserable. No, it's actually single men who, on average, are less happy than single women. What's going on with that? Well, my guest today is Elaine Hoan, and she is a PhD candidate in psychology at the University of Toronto and author of a study that found single women are happier, more satisfied, and less desperate for a partner than single men. So we're going to dig into this trend. Why does that happen? How do gender roles, independence, social networks, and even sex factor in? And we're going to talk about how singlehood might just need a rebrand to catch up with all of this research. So whether you're single, coupled, cohabitating, roaming around, doing the van life, whatever, whether you have dogs, cats, birds, frogs, snakes, whatever, this episode is for you. All right, so give me a few seconds while we connect to Elaine. All right, everyone, we are connecting with Elaine Hoan, and we're going to talk about this really cool study and being single and what it all means. But Elaine, let's start with you. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, give us an introduction, and what got you interested in studying singlehood and well-being?
Yeah, so I'm a PhD student in experimental psychology at the University of Toronto in Canada. And yeah, like you mentioned, I study what makes people happy in singlehood and romantic relationships. And I look at a variety of things like demographics and personality traits, and even culture and geography, all to sort of paint this picture of who would be happier in singlehood versus in romantic relationships. In terms of what got me started, it was actually this TED Talk that I had listened to in one of my undergraduate psychology classes. And it was basically this longitudinal study conducted by Harvard where they tried to track over 700 different Harvard alumni and essentially look at what predicts happiness long term. And they had tracked a whole bunch of things like their income, their career success, how famous they were, etc. And what they found was that the number one predictor of lifelong happiness wasn't all of those more material financial things, but it was the quality of their social connections. And I thought that was so powerful, that I feel like the cliche of we kind of spend our daily lives chasing money and wealth and perhaps fame for some people, but ultimately what matters most is our connections. So I thought, okay, I kind of got to study this and dedicate my career in life to really understanding this. So here I am now.
That's awesome. What are you getting your PhD in?
Yeah, so it's experimental psychology within the social psychology stream. So there's like different streams. There's like cognitive, developmental, yeah, and I'm specifically in social psychology.
Very cool. All right. All right. So there's this stereotype that single women are unhappy. I guess it's single people are unhappy, but you hear it probably more about single women, especially if you go on social media, right? Like the memes can be super harsh. What do you make of that? And did you want to challenge that before you did this study we're going to talk about?
Yeah, so I had heard initially of this term spinster that was used to describe like single unmarried women, especially older unmarried women. And I had heard it both in the singlehood literature of like, feminist scholars or like singlehood scholars sort of talking about this term, but even in like media shows like in Bridgerton, where it just seemed like they were talking about like, oh, like I would do anything to avoid this horrible fate of being a spinster. And so I guess all of those bachelors, or I guess are all those stereotypes, in addition with the stereotype of being a bachelor, where you have this like young, eligible man who is like highly desired by many women. And so together that would suggest that, okay, women are very, very unhappy in their singlehood and men are really, really happy in their singlehood. And so yeah, we just wanted to put that to the test empirically.
It's funny because I was online and there's something about cats, right? Like, what is that? And this guy on X was commenting to someone else, and he wrote, and she was like, "I'm really happy single." He's like, "Yeah, be happy with all your cats." And it got me thinking, and I wrote him back, and I'm like, "Well, what do you say to married people who have cats? Like, lots of different people have cats. It's like, why, like,
Mhm.
how did cats come? The poor cats." So.
Yeah, there's this lab at the University of British Columbia, or sorry, no, they're at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. And they have this one paper, Brittany Dennett and Yuthika Gurme, that's like called I think like Cat Ladies. Oh, sorry, this is my bad. This is by other student, but this is by Yuthika Gurme's lab. It's like Cat Ladies, and it's like a singlehood paper, I think looking at different stereotypes. And yeah, it is it is interesting how there's all these different stereotypes, and I don't know where the cats came from.
I don't know either. And like my parents are, they're married and they're both into animal rescue and they have like more
Yeah.
cats than anybody I know. And I'm like, it's funny. So for people who don't necessarily read scientific studies or they don't have a background, can you tell us in like plain language how you did this research?
Yeah, so usually maybe in other fields like chemistry, you might be measuring like chemicals, or like in neuroscience, you might be scanning the brain. But in psychology, and specifically social psychology in particular, we usually essentially just ask people how they feel. We administer these self-report measures that have been sort of rigorously tested by our researchers, and we give these surveys to thousands of different people. So in our study, we had surveyed 6,000 different singles from around the world. They came from different countries like the United States, Mexico, Poland, and the UK as well. And they ranged across the age ranges from like 18 all the way to 75. And to participate in the survey, participants had to have been single for at least 6 months. Since that sort of creates like a established singlehood period, opposed to if they had just left a romantic relationship and they're just still in shambles over it. And then from there, we asked them to report their gender, and then answer a few validated questions about their well-being and how happy they are in their singlehood, their lives, their sex lives, and how much they wanted a romantic partner.
And I think that's a great point you just made. I didn't even think about that before because depending on where you are and single, like if you just get out of a relationship, you might be hurting and like grieving even. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly. So
the
then when you
six
go
months.
to survey those people about their well-being, like, they're going to tell you like, oh,
So
I am super
yeah.
unhappy across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you looked at life satisfaction, relationship satisfaction, even sexual satisfaction. And just for our listeners, you can measure these things. Like they're personal, but these measures that you were talking about, asking people questions, they're validated, right? The surveys are somewhat okay.
Yeah, exactly. So we put them through various statistical tests, including what is called factor analyses, which I won't get too much into the nitty-gritty of it, but it essentially can tell us whether or not like what you are measuring with these items actually taps into what you're thinking you're measuring. Like if you have a whole set of questions, is that actually measuring people's happiness, or is it measuring something random, like maybe, I don't know, their faith or their religion or their meaning in life or something? You specifically want to study like their life satisfaction. And yeah, we have statistical tests to sort of get around that. So that's usually the sort of ringer that you have to put these items through for it to be considered validated. And yeah, and like chemists who have their beakers and neuroscientists who use their MRIs for brain scans, for example, we simply just use self-report measures. And I remember in my like intro psychology class, like the first psychology class I had ever taken, I remember the instructor saying that like, well, social psychology is actually like one of the hardest streams because what we're trying to measure isn't actually tangible, unlike a chemist or other, natural scientists where you can actually potentially touch what it is that you're studying. When it comes to psychology, like how do you even study something as abstract and broad as like human happiness? And so it is a whole area of research related to measurement, specifically in psychology. But yes, we have to put these measures through the psychometric ringer.
All right. So once you had the data, what stood out? What were some of the results that you reported on?
Yeah, so the main primary result that we found was that overall, women in general were happier with their singlehood. And this was true across all of the outcomes that we measured. So they reported higher life satisfaction, more satisfaction with their singlehood, higher sexual satisfaction, and they also reported a lower desire to have a romantic partner. So they didn't really care as much for desperately wanting to be in a romantic relationship compared to men. And so that was the main finding that we had found. And there was also another additional finding that had came from some feedback that we got about, well, is this just the case that women in general are happier and singlehood doesn't even matter? Is it just the case that in general women tend to be happier? And so we had compared our sample to another subsample of people who were actually in a romantic relationship to see if that was the case. And we had found that it was actually a unique benefit for single people. So we found that when looking at people who were in romantic relationships, there was no difference in how happy they were for those people who were in a romantic relationship. So men and women who were partnered were equally happy. Whereas for singles, it was single women who were uniquely happy with their singlehood. So it does seem to be something that, is unique to single women in particular.
And did you compare, you didn't compare single women with married women, so you can't
Uh,
right?
we yeah, no, we didn't. Only because there is a lot of past studies that have done that. And that's actually probably the bulk of the literature. So it's actually a very new field that we're kind of creating now with singlehood research, where we're actually only focusing on singles. But for the past like several decades, or like the history of relationship science, it
Yeah.
has only focused on people who were in relationships and people who were married. And single people were always just like the sort of sub comparison to group. And they would just consistently show over and over again that married and partnered people were higher in their well-being than single people.
Yeah.
But eventually people were like, okay, maybe we should actually study singles, like just for the sake of singlehood.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I had another researcher on to talk about dementia and married couples, and she kind of turned that upside down because usually there was like this protective effect, and she's like, well, no, it actually has to do more with the quality of the relationship. It doesn't necessarily like
Mm,
marriage isn't what they found, this research
mhm.
team, it was just more of like the quality. And I was like, so that's interesting. I think that that's maybe what in the future we'll see more of. That's my hypothesis. Um,
Yeah.
did anything surprise you in your work? Were you surprised by the results?
Um, I wasn't entirely surprised by the results, and this isn't exactly answering your question, but I feel like maybe like the least surprising aspect was the fact that men reported a higher desire for a partner. And I feel like just anecdotally, I had always heard that as well, of just like a lot of men sort of spend their time, their energy seeking romantic partners. And it's very like sort of I don't know, like even when they're with their friends, it's very like dating women focused, at least amongst like heterosexual men, where like, it might involve like catcalling, or they see a pretty girl pass by and they're like, oh my gosh, look over there, or they're just like constantly talking about their like romantic escapades. And I feel like all of that just suggests that, okay, like men seem to be like pretty desperate for being in a romantic relationship. Not that that's not the case within women's circles, but I just feel like that always stood out to me as like a really strong like theme within men's like friendship networks, is just so, I guess, focused around romantic relationships. So that's one finding that I wasn't surprised by. And even going into it, despite the sort of stereotype types about like single women being unhappy, I think that at least because the sample was collected in like a modern age, like in this like current era, that I'm also not too surprised by these findings. And maybe the results would change if we had looked 20 years ago.
No, that's a really good point. Because culturally, right, like women are getting out. I hate the word patriarch. I don't know why I don't like the word, because maybe because it's
Mm.
overused. Like people just, it's become one of
Mm.
those words that people just say, but there's a lot of truth to it,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
just getting out from under the umbrella.
Right.
Finally, dear Lord. So single women often feel more content or satisfied than single men. Why do you think that is, or what are some of the theories that are out there for why that might be?
Yeah, so even though we didn't test this in the paper, we had two really strong sort of working theories or hypotheses about what we think might be going on. One of which being related to this theory with a really long name called the Van Anders heteronormativity theory of low sexual desire, which basically tries to explain this common finding in sexuality research that finds that women consistently report a lower sexual desire. This theory essentially argues that, well, the reason why they're reporting low sexual desire is because of all of these dynamics within heterosexual relationships, like women taking on more household chores, more emotional labor, even more sexual labor, whereas sometimes like bedroom dynamics are unbalanced. All these things together contribute to women's overall reported lower sexual desire. So it's not exactly that women biologically are different and want sex less. It's more so about all these different things that's just reducing how much they want to have sex because they're just tired. And so we think that this sort of plays into what's going on here, because perhaps singlehood is a sort of more like welcome alternative to romantic relationships that women might associate with, like, excess like unpaid labor. Perhaps like in singlehood, they might have more autonomy and not being able to have to do that, compared to being in a heterosexual relationship. So that's one thing that we think might be going on, is that perhaps singlehood is just a happier alternative to romantic relationships for some women. Secondly, we think that, again, based off the existing literature, that social networks probably have a lot to do with what's going on. So there is research showing that single women tend to have broader social networks, better quality social networks, better connections with people like strangers or neighbors and family and friends. And we know that from singlehood research, these are really, really important aspects of singles' lives. So, if you're not in a romantic relationship, then you're going to have to get your social connections need met elsewhere. And if you just don't have that, then that makes singlehood just really, really difficult. And I think that's the case for a lot of single men, unfortunately. I mean, you might have heard of this, male loneliness epidemic going on, and just a lot of sort of like high rates of men's suicide and depression. And I think a big key factor in that is the social connections that I think single young men are just feeling increasingly lonely. And you even see that in things like incel groups, where they're specifically mentioning that like they feel really lonely. They can't get access to women or sex, and that just like really, really frustrates them. And so I think that social networks and social connections is definitely playing a role here.
Do you think those men are unhappy or dissatisfied because they're not able to get sex, or like do they really want a connection? Because I think there's a difference there, right? Between
Mhm.
sex and relationships and intimacy, or is it both? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the expert to ask on this is William Costello. He's one of my
Yeah.
like graduate school friends, and he does all of his work on incels. And I think that what he would probably argue, and I would trust his opinion on it, is that, well, one, I guess, yes, I do think that that's one of their main sort of taglines, like incel standing for like involuntary celibate. And so they're actively sort of like protesting that, like, I can't, get sex, I can't get access to women, and like that really frustrates them. But I do think that underneath the core is just really, really high rates of mental health issues and high rates of depression. And William has even mentioned that they have really high rates of being on the autism spectrum, and all of it's just create for difficulties with like both like your own happiness and like social connection. I feel like that is probably underneath deeply what's going on.
That's really interesting. And then getting back to what you said about women, anecdotally, so, oftentimes you'll hear female friends or coworkers, whatever, and they'll say things like they'll describe having sex with their partner as a chore.
Mm,
But it's because of like they're tired or, they feel
mhm.
overworked and stuff like that. But I guess you might hear that less with men.
Right, right. I do think that there's a lot that's like set up in the way that like straight couples have sex that like typically does tend to benefit the man more. And one of the most like provocative things in that Van Ender's like paper was when she was talking about lingerie and how even like the act of like women wearing lingerie and then like unveiling themselves is almost like unwrapping a gift, and in that way it's like almost like kind of objectifying, and just once again another sort of way to prioritize and please like the man within heterosexual sexual dynamics. And I think that people will probably have a lot of opinions on that, but I thought that was really interesting and provocative. I had never thought of lingerie as like unwrapping a gift box.
It's so funny, but like on a personal note, yeah, I remember a past conflict where like I received lingerie for my birthday, and in my head, my first thought was actually, well, this is for you.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Right.
just purely anecdotal, but that's when you said
Yeah.
that, it just reminded me of that. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. So if being single were to be rebranded, in a perfect world, how would you rebrand it?
Hmm. Um, I think I would maybe, I guess, primarily rebrand it less as a transitional phase. So I think currently, singlehood is often thought about that sort of space in between relationships. Like, okay, you're single now. Like, are you looking? Or maybe like once you feel ready enough, then you're going to start looking. It's like constantly like looking towards when is your next romantic relationship. And so, and that way, singlehood is just really thought of this like transitionary stage. But I think if I were to rebrand it, I would just try to be able to treat it as its own stage, such that if you are single, like people aren't constantly asking you, okay, well, when are you looking for your next relationship? Are you on the apps? Because imagine if it were the flip side, that romantic relationships were thought as a transitional stage, then you would constantly be asking them, well, when are you guys going to break up? And when are you going to enter your next relationship? But that's completely socially unacceptable to do so. And so I think that if singlehood were just allowed its own sort of status as like people can willingly choose to be single and be single,
Yeah.
um, then I think that that would be a beneficial rebrand.
I love that answer. That is such a good answer. People be like, oh no, I need to find a partner to be stable, or I need to find a partner to bring to a work event and that kind of thing. And
Right.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted to ask you, you kind of talked about like social networks and why single women might report being happier. So or what that is implying that single men may not have those types of social networks.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to like men's social dynamics, and especially with friendships in particular, there is just less like emotional support in men's friendships, which I think is not like anything new. But there is like, research looking at like dynamics within friends networks and showing that while women tend to engage in a lot of like conversational activities, and they can just like, potentially even like sit in a coffee shop for hours and just chat and talk about everything and anything, including their emotions, where there's just less stigma for women to talk about how they feel, whereas for men and their friendships, it's usually a lot more activity based, and they might do things like video games or sports, etc. But it's less focused on like, getting to know each other and disclosing like things about their lives and their emotions and what they're going through, etc. And I feel like those sorts of dynamics just don't set men up for the same amounts and quality of emotional support. And yeah, of course, entrenched in all of that is just the general stigma of, men being called like a wuss, or just like being called weak if they do express any sort of vulnerable emotions.
And I guess, do you think that's cultural? Is that
I do think that it might be stronger in some cultures than others, and we're going to use the word that you don't like, but I do think that patriarchy
it's just
across
me.
the whole world, I do think that that is one like potentially like I guess culturally universal norm is that most societies in the world, at least most like major societies, are patriarchal, and I feel
Yeah.
like that is where a lot of this like toxic masculinity comes from.
Yeah. No, I mean it is toxic for sure. And do you think we'll get like, you just did this research, you're starting a whole career. Do you have faith that like the stigma and the stereotypes around single women particularly will go away in society?
Yeah, I do think so. I think like, with my research and like all the other research from other singlehood scholars and even like feminist scholars, like I feel like this messaging is already sort of dispersing. And like the fact that
Yeah.
we're even seeing that single women are happier, I think already shows that okay, like I think that stigma against like single women is probably not like a strong enough force to like be able to like make them just like the most unhappy people in the world. Like
Right.
obviously, I think that you could still be stigmatized and discriminated, but still be happy. But I think that it suggests that like women are on the right pathway to just
Yeah.
feeling better about their singlehood. I think maybe more so where the worry should lie is in what's happening with men.
Right. No, that's a great point. Like it's sort of more of a an epidemic in men and they're not willing to talk about it. And women working and being able to support themselves, do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Because I think like just sort of shifting from the traditional like norms of like men being the breadwinner and that being the sort of one of the main things that they contribute to a relationship is like financial support, and being the
Yeah.
one to rake in the money while the women, her place is mostly in the home and taking care of children and like housework. I feel like now that those dynamics have really shifted and women can very much provide their own financial materials, and like resources, I think the main benefit that men can bring in is probably more relationship specific things. So less so about like money and bringing in the paycheck, but more so about how can you support me emotionally, or just like
Mm.
romantically as a partner. And I think as we've seen with the unbalanced dynamics of, there's like, stigma against men being like emotionally vulnerable, and like there's like unbalanced like dynamics within the bedroom where like men typically benefit in those cases, like in that case, like, I think men need to think about ways to shift, or I don't know, all of us together need to think about like how are like men's roles changing in romantic relationships. Because,
Yeah.
if it's primarily emotional and men are not taught to be emotional, then that's clearly like a disconnect there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a problem. If someone is single and feeling pressure to couple up right now, like what advice would you give them based off of your research and your experience?
Yeah. Well, I guess firstly, what is most likely in their case that they're probably unhappy with their singlehood. I think that what's one of the main predictors of whether or not you're happy with your with being single is how much you want a romantic partner.
Hmm.
And I think that I would probably say two things. I think one being that, like, I know that there is a lot of messaging, and typically the most amount of pressure that singles feel is from the people closest to them. So, you might think that it's primarily from the more distant things like media or culture, and those things play a role too. But I think what hits home the hardest is when your parents or your relatives, et cetera, just keep asking you, like, when are you going to find a girlfriend or when are you find a boyfriend? And you just get that every time you're at a family gathering, and you just know that you're going to come like without a partner, or without a date with you. I think that's when it like feels like, oh gosh, like, their singlehood status is the most prevalent and the most like salient. And so I think I would suggest to them, like, okay, just know that like singlehood can and is very much its own valid status. If you just want to live your best happy single life, there are like increasingly more people who are choosing not to get married and not be in romantic relationships, and you're totally valid in that sense. But I think secondly, and I think this is what my advisor, Dr. Jeff McDonald, would say, is that it's also okay to want a romantic relationship. I think currently with like there's been like a rise in singlehood advocates. So people who are just really, really advocating against like any like stigma towards singles, which they call singleism. And I think that I would also say to these people that like it's okay to also want a romantic relationship as well. It's not like the end of the world. As long as you're just sort of like respecting what you truly want and what makes you happy and not letting like other people just like force you down a road you don't want to go down, then I think like that's just the best way to go.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like kind of aligning with your internal desires and not external.
Right.
That's good. That's good in everything, like whether it's career, like
Right,
right?
exactly.
Like choosing a school, like it has to come from there's all this pressure on the outside, but if you can overcome that,
Mhm.
man, you'll do okay in life.
Yeah,
Um,
seriously.
yeah. One last question for you. Well, actually, I have two, but what's next for you? This was great, and your paper got a lot of media attention, and that's awesome for just starting
Yeah.
out and starting your career. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, gonna continue doing singlehood research, and still along similar lines, like hoping to look more at like cultural differences. We do have a paper that's currently like under review in a journal that's looking at these same findings, but in a Chinese sample. So looking at Chinese speaking participants living in China, and even though like the culture from the more Western countries that we studied this paper in compared to China is so drastically different, we actually find the exact same results there. So the same findings replicated, such that like single women were higher across the board in all the outcomes. And so we thought that was really cool because it sort of suggests maybe there's something culturally universal potentially happening here. But yeah, I'm further also hoping to test that specific theory that we put forth about like the social networks. And we have some planned studies that are hoping to actually look at the dynamics within like friend groups. We have this one study planned with another researcher, Dr. Jesse Sun at Washington University, where we're looking at groups of four like friendships, like little friend groups, and having them like sort of rate each other. And then from there, we can see like, okay, like within this like social group, are there like differences in terms of like how happy the single men and women are? If you feel particularly connected to this person compared to this person, how does that potentially buffer like any like dissatisfaction they might have with their singlehood, etc.? And we can better look more closely at the sort of social dynamics there amongst like men and women. So we're really
Yeah.
excited about that. But yeah, a lot of cool, interesting stuff, all related to singlehood and
Thanks.
well-being.
Yeah. I'm curious, when single men, did any like reach out to you or, like when they read your study? And I'm just curious because I was like, I wonder what, they felt like when they read this. Like, did it make them angry? Did they say, oh,
Mm.
that resonates? You know?
Right.
I
So
was just
they hadn't
curious.
reached, yeah, they hadn't reached out to me, but I had sort of briefly browsed some of the comments like across the different like news outlets,
Dangerous,
and
dangerous to do
very,
that.
very dangerous, and results vary drastically by the outlet. So like on Refinery 29, for example, you have a lot of women who are commenting about like, oh, I totally resonate with this, or like, oh, I see this a lot in like my friends and like my like mother, etc., like that they just that these results seem to hold up for them. And then if you look at like other outlets, like I think like maybe it was like Washington Post, or I forget. Oh no, it was New York Post. Sorry, New York Post, or like Puberty on Instagram. Like it was a completely different demographic. And there, yeah, there were a lot of really angry single men. There was like one comment in particular, and I had used this in my conference talk for this presentation because I thought it was just hilarious, that one of them being that like these results are so skewed because the study is conducted and led by a single woman, I'm sure. And then someone else commented like, oh, Jeff McDonald is a woman, well maybe in Canada. And that's, me and Jeff, my advisor, wrote this paper, so I thought that was hilarious. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of angry comments, particularly from men. But I think that what I'm trying to sort of dispel is that this research is not meant to like put them down. If anything, I think it's just further opening up and uncovering this wound spot that there's clearly something happening with single men where we need to start thinking about why is it that they're reporting such low levels of happiness, especially
Yeah.
in singlehood.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they hopefully that is the most productive way to look at it. And like, hey guys,
Yeah.
like maybe we can help you out here. Elaine, thank you so much for your time. This is great, and I will definitely stay on the lookout for, the other studies that you guys are producing and that kind of thing. Very interesting and timely stuff. So, yeah, thanks for coming on and doing it. That's good stuff. And
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
definitely, and good luck with everything, with your career and all that. And when are
Thank
you
you
done
so
with?
much.
Yeah, when are you done with
Uh,
your?
Yeah, so I'm in my fourth year of my PhD now. It's a 5-year program, so I have a bit under 2 more years to go, and then yeah, I'll get to
And
check
then
off doctor on my dentist form. So
there you
yeah,
go. That's right. Hey, if you
right.
earn it, you use it, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot. It's good to see you again and take care. Enjoy the rest of your day there.
All right, take
All
care.
right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'd love to know your thoughts on the episode. How did the conclusions make you feel? The conclusions from her research, from Elaine's research. Why do you think the conclusions made you feel the way you feel? Maybe think about that. You can let me know if you want over email, Facebook, Instagram, all those places. And now it's time for the closing quote. And this one is a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre. And here it is. If you are lonely when you're alone, you are in bad company. Oh, 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 oh. I don't necessarily think that's true, by the way. I think people can get lonely. I think that makes sense. At times you can feel lonely. But I do think people don't realize how cool they are and how much fun they are to hang out with by themselves. So maybe we just need to teach people how to be alone, which I think starts with like really getting to know yourself and your wild and fun imagination. And then you can hang out with yourself and be like, oh, this is awesome. I don't know. That's my theory, anyways. But go ahead, take care of yourselves, whether you're single, married, or blissfully coexisting with whatever species, cats, dogs, birds, frogs. Good for you. And I will see you next time on Causes or Cures. Goodbye for now.